Have you ever thought about living in the United States, but in order to leave home and visit any other American city, having to first pass through Canada? Well, I know it seems hard to believe, but there is a U.S. city where children cross international borders every day just to go to school, where buying milk at the nearest market means showing your passport to a federal agent, where residents drive 25 miles through another country's territory to reach the rest of the United States, and where the fastest ambulance isn't American, it's Canadian. But where did this curious city come from, belonging to one country and at the same time depending on another? Today, Bello Mundo takes you to Point Roberts, the strangest American city in the world, where living is literally an international issue. To understand Point Roberts, we first need to look at the size of the border between the United States and Canada. It is simply the largest international border on the planet, stretching almost 5,500 miles. It is so much land that if you were to walk the entire length, you would almost circle the globe. Much of this line was drawn in the 19th century, at the 49th parallel, a straight line on the map that was supposed to separate British from American lands. The thing is, back then there was no GPS, no satellites, nothing like that. The division was made with a compass, rope, paper, and a lot of margin for error. More than 900 stone markers were placed to indicate the boundary, but even so, the layout left some very strange situations. There are places where the line runs right through the middle of a lake, cutting the water in two. In other places, it separates houses and even entire streets. And of course, this straight line ended up creating exclaves, pieces of one country's territory trapped on the outside, surrounded by the other. A famous example is the Northwest Angle in Minnesota. Another, even more curious example is Point Roberts at the tip of the Tsawwassen Peninsula, right next to Vancouver. When they realized that this piece of land was below the 49th parallel, the British even tried to negotiate with the Americans. They asked them to cede the territory to avoid future headaches, but the United States did not accept, and the map remained as it was. In other words, the United States ended up with a completely isolated piece of land, with no land connection to the rest of the country. Thus was born Point Roberts, a community that is part of the United States, but which you can only access by passing through Canada. After the Oregon Treaty line was drawn, this tiny piece of land officially became part of the United States and ended up becoming a somewhat forgotten place. In the early years, almost no one wanted to live in this isolated place, and for a long time the only people seen there were the Coast Salish indigenous peoples, who had inhabited the region long before the arrival of the British and Americans. The U.S. government even declared the area a military reserve. In practice, no soldiers were ever stationed there. What existed were deserted beaches, dense forest, and an almost unguarded border. And then you can imagine what happened. The place ended up becoming a refuge for people who wanted to stay away from the law. At the end of the 19th century, reports tell of smugglers and outlaws using Point Roberts as a hideout. It was easy to get in and out by boat without passing through authorities. A forgotten land, but perfect for those who lived by shortcuts. This reputation reappeared a few decades later, during Prohibition in the United States, from 1920 to 1933. While the consumption of alcoholic beverages was prohibited in the United States, Canada still had regions where sales were legal. As a result, Point Roberts became a route for the famous rum running, the smuggling of rum and other beverages. Boats left Vancouver loaded with bottles, sailed to the city's coast, and from there the alcohol was smuggled into the United States. With minimal oversight, it was a gold mine for those who wanted to make quick money. But little by little, honest pioneers began to arrive. The first permanent settler was John Harris in 1873, raising cattle. Soon after, small shops appeared, and at the end of the 19th century, fishing companies discovered a prime route for salmon there. It was around this same time that Icelandic immigrants arrived. By 1904, almost half of the local population was of Icelandic origin. They brought with them their language, customs, and fishing traditions, and helped shape a village that was slowly beginning to take shape. Little by little, improvisation gave way to permanence. By the early 20th century, Point Roberts already had a hotel, post office, warehouse, and even a dance hall. In 1919, a road finally connected the village to the Canadian border, facilitating arrival by land. Before that, almost everything was done by boat. Even so, the pace remained the same, calm, isolated, discreet. And perhaps it was precisely this tranquility that, a few decades later, attracted a new audience. In the following decades, especially from the 50s onwards, families from Vancouver began to see that corner of America as a weekend getaway. They built summer homes, occupied the beaches, and transformed the village into a kind of holiday colony, where you could relax in a piece of the US without leaving the Canadian backyard. However, living there on a daily basis always had its peculiarities. After all, we are talking about an American territory separated from the rest of the United States. Living in this isolated piece of the United States is not like living anywhere else in the country. The rules are American, but everything around is Canadian. The community has just over 1,000 inhabitants. According to the most recent census, more than 70% are retired, and it's not hard to guess why, is it? The city itself is an attraction for those seeking silence, fresh air, calm seas, and real estate that is cheaper than in Vancouver, the largest city on Canada's west coast. However, daily life there is full of obstacles. To attend school, many children must leave home, cross the Canadian border at Tsawwassen, travel 20 kilometers through the suburbs of Vancouver, reach the US border, and only then return to the United States. At the end of the day, they repeat the entire journey. 4 borders in a single school trip. No wonder many parents prefer to avoid this and resort to homeschooling. The situation is similar in terms of healthcare. If someone gets sick or needs emergency care, there is no hospital in the area. The only option is to call an ambulance that crosses the border twice, or a helicopter coming directly from Bellingham, the nearest American city. Even everyday shopping is a challenge. The place has a small market and a few convenience stores, but many products are expensive because of the complicated logistics. That's why many people cross the border to shop in Canada, even though, technically, they have to declare everything on their return. It's a routine where the simple becomes complex. And the most curious thing? Many people like just that. The peace, the isolation, the feeling of being in a place where time passes slowly. But this isolation and calm also has its price, and sometimes it is too high. If Canada closes its doors, life there practically freezes, and from time to time this dependence takes a heavy toll. In early 2025, the enclave once again felt the weight of politics. Relations between the United States and Canada became strained due to trade disputes, tariffs, harsh statements, and a wave of nationalist sentiment on the Canadian side followed. Campaigns encouraged consumers to prioritize domestic products and avoid American destinations. Point Roberts, which survives almost exclusively on visitors from across the border, felt the immediate impact. About 90% of local businesses' customers came from neighboring cities in Canada, and suddenly that traffic disappeared. Small businesses saw their revenues plummet. Some stores even recorded a drop of more than half compared to previous years. There were even cases of consumers returning goods when they discovered they would have to pay extra tariffs when crossing back. Many Canadians sent messages of support, but made it clear that they would not return while the trade war lasted. For the community, it was a hard blow. Residents knew that the fight was coming from distant offices, but they were the ones footing the bill. This is not the first time Point Roberts has suffered from the moods of the border. During the pandemic, for example, the enclave nearly collapsed. That's because, with the border closed to non-essential travel, residents were practically stuck at home. Suddenly, Canadians, who accounted for the majority of visitors and consumers, stopped crossing. Vacation homes stood empty, restaurants had no customers, and gas stations had no lines. To make matters worse, even those who lived there faced absurd difficulties. Children were unable to attend school in Blaine. Seniors were unable to get simple medical appointments. To solve this, improvisation was necessary, and the U.S. government even authorized an emergency ferry, a boat that connected the village to the port of Bellingham twice a week, just to take people to the American mainland. It felt like living in a social experiment, an enclave isolated from the world, invisible even to the two countries that surrounded it. Newspapers even called the place the American ghost town in Canada. When the border reopened in 2021, relief came, but also the reminder that this community depends almost entirely on one thing: the goodwill of its neighbors. It is not just a forgotten piece of the United States. It is a city that lives between two nations, borrowing a little from each to survive. And this is evident both in its customs and in the landscape itself. The connection with Canada is inevitable. Vancouver, the great metropolis on the west coast, is only 30 kilometers away. Seattle, the closest American city, is more than 120 miles away. This difference in scale explains why ties with Canada are so strong. It is much more practical to cross the border to take care of everyday matters than to drive for hours to Seattle. It is not surprising that many residents work, study, or have family on the other side. The culture is hybrid, and this is even reflected in the celebrations. In early July, when Canadians celebrate their national holiday, they only have to wait a few days to join in the American 4th of July celebrations. The flags of both countries often appear side by side, flying in backyards or at community events. And this mix is not limited to symbols. It also appears on the table. The 4th of July barbecue is full of hamburgers and roasted corn, but residents often include dishes from across the border. Smoked salmon from British Columbia, fresh Pacific crab, and red fruit pies made with local blueberries are on the menu. Even the craft beer scene, which is strong in Vancouver, has gained ground in Point Roberts community gatherings. The result is a table that tastes like the United States, but with Canadian seasoning. Even the basic infrastructure comes from the neighbor. Electricity and piped water are supplied by the neighbor, because it would be too expensive to individualize and bring everything from the United States. It's a detail that reinforces how Point Roberts lives on the border, not only on the map, but also in practice. Despite all the challenges, those who live there assure us that the reward is worth it, and that reward is nature. The enclave is surrounded by green areas and preserved parks. The four corners of the peninsula are occupied by public spaces. To the north is Monument Park, where the original border marker, drawn in 1846, still stands. For residents, walking to that point is almost like touching history. On the east side is Maple Beach, a white sand beach facing Boundary Bay. In the summer, the tide rises slowly, the sun warms the water, and transforms the beach into a kind of natural bathtub. Entire families take advantage of the high tide to swim, and when the water recedes, you can walk hundreds of meters into the sea, collecting shells and small crabs. It is a setting that combines tranquility with fun, especially for children. Further south is Lily Point, an environmentally protected area with cliffs, woods, and trails. The place is of archaeological and historical importance because indigenous peoples used the region as a fishing spot long before the arrival of settlers. Today, it is one of the most beautiful corners of the enclave. The trails lead to a secluded and quiet beach, perfect for those seeking peace. At the southwestern tip is Lighthouse Park, which offers views of the open sea and has become a whale-watching spot. During the months of May to September, orcas and humpback whales often pass through the region. With a little luck, you can see their tails rising above the water. This contact with the giants of the ocean is something that leaves a mark on those who live there. It is no coincidence that many residents report having childhood memories linked to these sightings. The peninsula also holds other surprises. There are bike paths that skirt the coast, dense forests that have never been cut down, and even a stretch known as the Enchanted Forest, where local artists have scattered sculptures and curious objects among the trees. Animals are a constant presence. It is common to see deer crossing secondary roads, bald eagles hunting fish on the beach, and raccoons prowling backyards at night. For many people, this proximity to wildlife is one of the greatest privileges of living in this small spot on the map. Geographical isolation has also created an intense community life. Since the town is small, almost everyone knows each other. There are gardening clubs, walking groups, historical associations, book clubs, and even amateur radio groups. And since there is no surplus labor, it is common for the same person to accumulate several roles. The neighbor who organizes the library may also be the school bus driver and still help with the maintenance of the local school. This versatility is almost a rule. Each resident wears several hats to keep the town running. For all these reasons, many people describe Point Roberts as a perfect retreat. Safe, quiet, surrounded by nature, and at the same time connected to the urban life of Vancouver, which is just a few minutes away. It's a balance that few places in the world can offer. And perhaps that is precisely what makes this place so fascinating. Now we want to hear from you. Would you live in a place like this, isolated, dependent on another country, but surrounded by nature and peace? Or do you think living in an enclave would be crazy? Tell us in the comments. And if you enjoyed the trip, don't forget to like and subscribe here at Bello Mundo, because every week there are more curious stories from our planet.